Welcome back to Mac's Garage. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like, share, subscribe, or whatever. I'm standing here today with my Ford 352. It is an FE series of engine. This one is a 65, which I believe is actually kind of towards the end of the 352's life cycle. But anyway, I'm getting ready to start reassembling it. Today I'm going to be looking at the pistons and the rings in particular, and we're going to fit those up to the engine. So I don't even know if you can see the engine. You probably can't. So let me bring this down. That should do it. Yep. So our engine, yesterday I need both hands for this. I'm turning the camera off. So step one of this engine assembly for me was something that most of you guys will not have access to. However, if you put it back together in a timely manner from the machine shop, you won't need to do it. Or if you just want to wash it by hand, you can get pretty close to the same results. But that was actually doing a hot tank steam wash with this block. So we've got this thing cleaned. After it came out of the steam wash, I oiled it up. I'm gonna turn this a little bit. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. If we look at this engine block along the side here, we have 2, 3, 2, 3, and I bet that these ones were down on this side where they would have had numbers 1 through probably 4, if I'm not mistaken. In Ford world, Chrysler used letters, and what these indicate are what piston size is going where. So when they manufactured these in the 60s, you would have bins of pistons, and they would be numbered or lettered depending on your company, and you would size match them to the bores. And that was common practice all the way up through Chevrolet quit doing that on the LS series of engines, and that's maybe part of why some of those 6 liters were pretty piston knocky in the morning, because maybe they should have still been doing it a little bit. But anyway, what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do today, is I'm going to measure up my 8 pistons, which are in a box over here, and then I'm going to measure up my 8 bores, and I'm going to try to mix and match those to where we get the best fitment out of all 8 pistons that we can. This is something that's maybe not totally required, and honestly the reason that GM quit doing it and everybody else has quit doing it is because production quality and machining quality is just better than it used to be. So we have more consistent piston sizes, we have more consistent bore sizes. So I'm going to use my snap gauge, my micrometer, and I'm just going to take some cross measurements. And honestly, I know what type of setup this person had. These bores should be very true, very round. They should be nice bores. If you're doing, say, a used engine, maybe take a few measurements and try to do it the best you can. But if you're running used stuff, chances are they're not going to be perfectly circle, and they're not going to be perfect cylinders. So I think that's enough lead in. Let's go ahead and get measuring. So what I'm going to do here, and I've already done the other side to kind of practice up, I'm going to use my snap gauge like I did in the disassembly, or I guess it wasn't necessarily the disassembly, but the measurements to decide if you're going to actually rebuild it or not. I'm going to take that snap gauge, drag it through there, and then this is the part that you'll get better at as you go, and that's why I started with the other side. But we're going to just take a quick measurement here. Ooh, this one's a touch on the big side. Alright. I'm kind of surprised by that because all the other ones have been like perfect. But this one is like 1,000th over. So maybe I'll recheck that. That one is just a touch larger than the Actually, the first one on this side was just a touch big as well, and then the rest of them were exactly at 4030. Okay, so here are kind of my numbers. I don't know if you can see those or not, but we have these three. So the three on that side are perfect 30 over cylinders. So 4.0300. The number one there is about 5/10 thousandths over that, which is a 4.0305. This one was these two were the biggest cylinders. So we're talking about on 8 cylinders a range of 1/1000th of an inch, which is pretty much spot on. Now we'll grab the pistons, we'll measure those, and these are notes that I had from when we did the measurement video before. So my piston clearance, we want 1.5 to basically 1.5 to 2.5 thousandths of an inch, or 15/10,000ths, 23/10,000ths, depending on how you want to read it. So we're going to measure those pistons up and see if we're pretty close. As the bore gets larger, these clearances tend to get bigger. We haven't increased a ton, but we are a 30,000th of an inch bigger bore. So our piston clearance is probably going to fall slightly on this bigger side. But I don't know that yet. We'll see. Alright, so I've got these all numbered. I also realized that I don't know how to add, and what I was adding up on the micrometer to a 27 was actually 28. So these first three I went back and wrote over. Well, we've got anywhere from our biggest one is a 40285 or 4-inch 285/10,000ths. We got two of them at that side. Our smallest one is a 275. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our measurements we took off the bore and kind of match these up to where they are the best combination. Balanced and blueprinted engines, this is kind of what they're talking about. You're going through and you're mixing and matching your clearances to make it the best fit possible. Now the reality is that these pistons could go in any one of these cylinders and not have a problem, but we'll take a little bit of extra time and we'll get it matched up to where it is the best it can be. Alright, so here's where I ended up with my piston sizing. This is like the front of the engine, and this is where they're going to go hole-wise. And these are the measurements and the differences. So we've got, so spec was 15 to 23, and before I even started measuring pistons, I kind of said that this might be just a touch bigger, and that wouldn't hurt us because the bore is just a touch bigger. Well, we're at 2.5 thousandths or 25/10,000ths, which is 2/10,000ths bigger. Now, in all fairness, am I an accurate enough measurement type person to go to 10,000ths? Probably not. So these might be 23, they might be like 27, but that's kind of where we're at. We matched these up to where the piston clearance on most of these cylinders are basically 2.5/10,000ths. There are two of them, they're at 20,000ths, which is like dead center of this spec. But by taking a little bit of extra time measuring this stuff, we'll end up with a theoretically slightly better combination. And yet again, if you're a guy that's just buying these things and slamming them home, probably not going to be an issue. So let's look at our biggest piston. So a 4.0285, so a 4-inch 285/10,000ths piston. And if we put that in our smallest bore, which was exactly 4300, what would that clearance be? That clearance would still be 15/10,000ths, which is on the tight side of spec. So that is still fine. In the world, I mean, this is within reason, but if you have a choice between slightly too tight or slightly too loose, slightly too tight is going to cause you problems. Slightly too loose, probably going to run fine for a very long time. So the tightness factor would be a bigger problem than, let's take a look. Our smallest piston is a 4.0275, and our biggest bore is a 4.0310. So that would be, I'm not good at this math, basically a 35 10,000ths gap. It may make a little bit of piston slappy noise, but it's gonna run fine. This is better, don't get me wrong, like this is better than just throwing them in and getting the worst possible combination, which you're not, I mean, you're not guaranteed to do that. You might get a really good fit. All right, that's enough of that. Let's move on to rings. We're now ready to start kind of sizing our rings. This is a top ring here. We're going to check all of the rings. So we've got 8 top rings, 8 second rings, and 16 third rings that we're going to check the gap on, all of them. On this 352, I've got actually some just random specs written down, but I'll pull it up here. So our top ring, the compression rings, actually the top 2 rings, both compression rings, they spec at 15 thousandths of an inch. The oil rings are also 15 thousandths of an inch. There's our clearances, and it sounds like I have to go talk to somebody, so just a second. What we're going to do is we're going to take this top ring. I'm going to grab that piston here in a minute, and I'm going to check the ring gap that should be at least 15 thousandths of an inch. Honestly, I almost dropped it. These are kind of fragile. So I just kind of slide it in there like that. I'm going to take my piston, drop it down. Especially if you're doing a used engine, you want to drive this fairly deep into the bore. But even as it is, that just gives you a better chance of getting the piston actually square and the ring actually where you want it to be. So I've now driven that one down in. I'll grab my feeler gauges. I started to say this and then got distracted and started putting the ring in, but the spec is 15 thousandths of an inch. The heart, there's a bunch of things that change that, but honestly, one of the biggest things that you're going to base your ring gap on is the piston itself. Always read your directions that come with your pistons. So like this one has a note for hyper-eutectics, which these are not hyper-eutectics, but you'll actually increase the gap 40% with the hyper-eutectic. Now the idea is that as the engine runs, these rings actually swell up and get bigger, and well, when you get bigger inside a confined area, the gaps get closer together. If they touch, you got problems. A lot of people that do like nitrous or superchargers or things like that will open these ring gaps up wider to give more room for ring swell. This engine is probably going to spend some time doing some parade stuff, which is low speed, just kind of real slow cruising. Generally, you have cooling system issues in parade vehicles. You may or may not know that. But if you're building one of these engines, there's a fairly good chance it's a parade issue, or it's a parade vehicle, a classic car like that. So instead of the 15 thousandths, I'm actually going to shoot for 20. And I just have my 20 thousandths feeler gauge out. I've actually already put all these in, so I already know this one is not going to work, but this is my 20 thousandths feeler gauge. And if this was going to work, it would just slide in there, and it does not. This one is fairly tight. This one is like right at 15 thousandths. So again, out of the box, this would work, but we are right at the right at spec, and I want to open them up. Now, if we go over to say this one here, 20 thousandths fits snug there. It's actually a touch loose here, so this one's probably like 21, 22. It fits good there. So on this cylinder, I'm going to open up this ring just a little bit. Even though we're in spec, I'm just going to file on it a little bit, open it up, and try to give it that little bit of extra clearance. I have a video on doing that in my snowmobile stuff. I'm not going to do it on here. But I've got to open up this one, and this one, and this one, I think. There's 3 of them that I'm going to have to file a little bit to get out to our 20 thousandths. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to file these. I'm going to get these all fitted, ready to go. And then I'll show you the second ring. Then I'll show you the third rings. And then we'll probably not put them together yet because I need to clean stuff still. Yet again, I started a thought and didn't finish it. Actually, I might have finished it, but the idea behind a slightly bigger ring on something that's going to do a lot of low-speed parade duty like this one probably will is that it's going to get hot. There's a fairly good chance that this engine will get at least, well, it'll get quite a bit warmer than it's really designed to run at. Having that extra room will give it room to not bind and break rings. Now this engine had 6 out of its 8 top rings broken when we took it apart. I think that was the number. You can look back at the videos on the teardown to find out, but I believe it was 6 out of 8 had broken top rings. Now I really think that was about bore issue, but that's alright. We're going to open these rings up just a little bit beyond what spec is. Now we're going after the second rings. So I've already inserted them all into the engine. There's a couple theories when it comes to ring gap on the second ring. One of them is that because the top ring is closer to the combustion, it will expand more, and therefore you run a bigger gap on the top ring and a smaller gap on the second ring. Another theory is that even though the upper ring is going to expand more, it does 95% of your sealing. Honestly, it does like all of your sealing. The second ring is more of a scraper, so you do not want to have a buildup of compression gas between the two, so you want a larger gap in the second ring. Ford spec'd out the same gap for both of them. That's what I'm going to do on this engine. This is not like a race engine. It is just going to be a nice cruiser. I would imagine it's not going to get revved out real high and beat on real aggressively. So we're going to do the same gap on this. So even though spec is 15 thousandths, I'm going to go ahead and do 20. And when I did that, all I do is take my 20 thousandths feeler gauge, and it's a go, no go. I mean, if it's a huge gap, then we got a problem. But realistically, as long as the 20 thousandths fits, which this one does, I don't know if that's going to be a great angle on it, but you just take that, and it fits well in all of these ring gaps. So, and it does on the other side as well. So these second rings don't require any filing or adjustment, so that's good. I'm not even going to pull the camera in here for the oil control rings. These are the really thin ones. I'm going to use 15 thousandths, which is spec on these, and I'm just going to go through and check all 16. So there's 2 of these. What you get is, let's see, you get a thin ring, separator, and then another thin ring on the other side. So we've got to check the gap on all 16 of these, which I've honestly already done. These are like 15 thousandths right on every single one of them. A couple of them were maybe at like 17, but 15 is what we're shooting for on this one, and they were there, so they are going to be fine. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. The next step here, and this is all, again, we will clean and wash this block one more time. This is pre-assembly checks. So what we're going to do is we're going to check clearances in all of these bearings. So we'll do the 5 mains first. And honestly, after we do the mains, we will probably just go ahead and wash the block, put it together, and do the pistons. And maybe not. we'll see what kind of mood I'm in. So we're going to start out by just popping the main caps. So we got all of those out of there. Honestly, there's a touch of overspray on this rear one from the primer job. I'm going to go ahead and get some lacquer thinner. I'm going to clean all of these out so there's no oily residue on them. And then we'll go to the next step. Our next step here is actually going to be measuring, and I've already got the main caps out, but we're going to put our crankshaft back in with the bearings. So we got to put the bearings in. This crankshaft has been turned 10 thousandths under, so that is going to be a thing. Sometimes these will come packed in order that they go because they're different widths or whatever. These ones are not like that. The only difference is that number 3 is going to have your thrust bearings on it. They all have holes. I'm not quite sure why they put holes in all the bearings. Did I only get half? I guess this is all of them. So we'll open these up. We're going to take them back out one more time, as we've kind of talked about already. But let's go ahead and get these set up. Okay, now usually when you have a bearing like this, there will be a spot on there, and I don't know if you'll be able to read it, but it says 0.010. That is a 10 thousandths, well, it's an oversize on the bearing, but it's an undersize on the crankshaft. So when they turn a crankshaft, they took 10 thousandths of material off of it, and these are the bearings that correspond to that. You will have a tab here that will line up with the tab in the block, and you just kind of take it and roll it in, and you want it to more or less line up with the top here, which this one does. That's a good thing. I'll take that and set it with there. The rest of these all appear to be exactly the same. So this lines up in exactly the same place as the original, but it covers like half the oil hole. So that's not what I would consider a great thing, but it's the way the originals were, so I guess we'll go ahead and go with it. I'll probably say this at different points throughout this video, but this truck had, or this engine had about 90,000 miles on it, which by today's standard, we think of 90,000 miles as a low mileage engine. This is a 1965. In 1965, when you had 90,000 miles on a vehicle or an engine, it was pretty much wore out, and that was just kind of the way it was. So to be doing a full rebuild at 90,000 miles is totally within the normal of this era engine. Doesn't really matter what brand. They were all kind of like that. They just wore out. Probably by 60,000 miles, if you took this apart, it would have needed roughly the same amount of work we just did to it, like the boring, the crank turning, all of that stuff. Valve guides, I think. I'd have to look back at that one. But that's just the way things were. So I'm going to go ahead, pop these in. I'll do the top ones, and we'll be right back. Uh-oh. There it is. Okay, so the crankshaft, I cleaned off all the main journal surfaces before I dropped it in here, at least fairly well. So I've got the crankshaft installed without any oil. Okay, so this is a little bit different. We're not oiling it yet. Before I cleaned that up, I used these lint-free rags. They should not leave any fibers or anything behind, unlike your just kind of normal shop rags. These are a little bit better for that. And now we're going to move on to Plasti-Gauge. So there are a lot of ways to measure bearing clearance on a crankshaft. Well, maybe not a lot, but there's more than one. This is one of them. I don't know. This is like a middle of the road deal. So this is going to give you a snapshot of one area of the crankshaft clearance. This crankshaft was just turned, so it should be round. That shouldn't be an issue. The block was, I don't think we did any line honing on this one, but the block was checked and it seems to be okay. So plastic gauge is what we're going to use here. The other thing you could do is install the bearings, put the caps on, torque the caps, check the, take a snap gauge like what we did on the cylinders, measure those, write down all your readings, measure the crankshaft in a couple different places to make sure that it's round and that you get an accurate measurement. And then you would subtract the crankshaft measurement from this measurement, and that would give you your oil clearance. We're going to do it with plastic gauge. So what plastic gauge is, so plastic gauge is this, like, I don't even know if it's going to show up. It's basically a string. What it does is as you tighten the cap down, it compresses it down, and then there's a gauge on the sleeve that tells you the amount of clearance. So I'm going to go through here and lay this out. And I'm going to put this on each one of the journals, kind of face up, or like straight up. That one slipped. Alright, I'm going to get these all set up, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the next step. But I'm going to run them basically at the top on each journal. Right, so now I've got, you can kind of see the little green lines. They're laid across all five mains. So with that laid across all 5 mains, we're going to come in. I'm going to put the center one in first, which is our thrust bearing. That's 3. I'm not going to tighten any of these down per se yet. But I'm going to start putting them all in, making sure I'm putting them in the proper direction. I almost screwed that one up. So I've got all 5 of these set. Sometimes it's easier to do them one at a time, and that's perfectly acceptable. If you spin the crankshaft at all during this process, you have to start over. If you spin the crankshaft, it wipes that plastic gauge and will make it inaccurate. So torque spec on these is 100 foot-pounds. I'm going to do it in steps. I've already got it snugged up pretty good, so I'm going to go 70 and then 100. The range is actually 95 to 105. We're going to go 100. Okay, so we got all 5 mains torqued down. I'm unsetting my torque wrench before I forget and leave it set all night. I'm going to come in and break these all loose. So now what I've got to do is I've got to try to get these main caps out of here without really rocking them too much that way or spinning the crankshaft. So I'm going to take, I could have gone with the bigger pry bar. Okay, so that's going to be one of these. Now, I didn't talk about clearances before we started. The oil clearances on this engine are right there. We're dealing with the main journal, so we're talking 6/10,000ths to 31 10,000ths. So basically 1 to 3 thousandths of an inch is a pretty good range on the mains. The looser it is, the more oil is in there, the better chance of a low oil pressure area. Realistically on this one, we'd like to fall kind of in the middle, but not too tight. So that one's out. I'm going to grab my gauge. You can kind of see it on there, but it's better on the actual crankshaft itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So what you're doing is you're just matching up the squish here with the size that we're at. So this is, I would say it's flattened a little bit more than the 2, but not quite as much as the 1.5. So we'd call that somewhere in between those two. The other side is exactly the same, and in here in the middle, that's where the groove, that grooved area in the bearing is. And I may have kind of screwed up because I probably shouldn't have put it right where that hole. I don't know why there's a hole in here, but these are Cleveite 70s. I don't know if they're 77, but they're Cleveite bearings. They have a good reputation. They have been around forever, so it's probably fine. I'm not sure why they did it though. Alright, so let's do the rest of these. Alright, so we got these all out. I'm gonna assume they're gonna be pretty similar. So again, that one's probably a little under 1.5. So this is the thrust bearing, and it's got a little bit more clearance, and I actually really like that for the thrust bearing because it has to feed oil down to the sides as well. The looser these are, kind of the more oil will come out of the bearing. This one we're back up to pretty close to 1.5. And then the rear main, I just moved that. Whoops. And the rear main is pretty loose. It's less than 3. Okay, so that's really close to 2. So that is all 5 mains have acceptable clearances. Very acceptable clearances, actually. So that is a good thing. Okay, so we're going to pull the crank back out like we just did. And I'm actually going to pull these bearings because we're going to final clean this block. So we've checked all the clearances. They're going to be good. I'm going to keep all of these bearings with their matched main cap, so that they will go back into the same places and they will all be good. So that's good for right now. I did kind of put stuff in the way of me doing a really nice job for the rods, but that's fine. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do in this video, I think, we're not going to check the rod clearance. We'll do that in the next one. It should be good, especially with how the crank looked. Like, I'm not concerned about this being wrong. You always, when you're having machine work done, the rule of thumb is trust but verify. So that means that find somebody you trust, find somebody that does good machine work, but still check them out. Like, we're checking all the clearances. We didn't just take for granted that it's all good, even though it came from somebody that I think is a very good machinist, and I trust their work, or I wouldn't be using them. Now we're going to hang the pistons. I'm going to zoom in on this. This is out of an old school book. It shows you the side number of the rod, the notch in the piston, and what banks it goes to. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 is on the left. 5, 6, 7, 8 is on the right of this picture. Yeah. So when we come out to the piston, we've got the notch, which is kind of hard to see, but there's a notch there. There it is. And then we've got the numbers on the rod, which are also kind of hard to see, but there's a 1 on each top and bottom. So this will sit like this, and the piston will sit like that. So let's get ready to put it together. First of all, make sure that this assembly is all cleaned up and ready to go. So I'll try my best to keep this in frame. We're going to take the piston, and which side you do first is kind of up to you. But I've got my less than awesome fitting on this one, as it turns out. Snap ring pliers. I'm going to put them in. I'm going to position the piston pin so it's pretty close. And this is kind of the problem I'm having. They just keep slipping off, which is par for the course with snap rings. I don't like snap rings, but here we go. Okay, so when we install these into the piston, we want to make sure that the snap ring goes basically straight down. I kind of scratched the outer bore of the piston. That'll be alright. The pin where the pin rides is fine. Everything was already clean before we started this, so I'm going to take this is just motor oil, and squirt a little bit in there, squirt a little bit in there, and give the pin a little bit. Kind of, I know my hands don't look overly clean, but they are. Kind of rub that around, lube up the pin a little bit. And then I'm going to take and put a little bit of oil inside the center of this rod area here. And I just spun it, so I don't know where the numbers are at. So we got that all lubed up. The numbers are over here. The notch is over here, I think. Nope, got it backwards. So the notch is there. That means the rod and piston have to go together like this. Okay, so I'm just going to take this rod, or the piston pin here, slide it through the rod. This has what is considered a floating piston pin, not a pressed. That means that, one, I can put it together myself easily here, and two, I guess that's really the big part, it is retained by snap rings rather than a press fit. So I'll take my other snap ring. This is going worse every single one of these I do, so I think this tool is bending a little bit. Okay, so that's down in. Move it around so it's pointed straight down. And that's it. So that is now assembled. That is cylinder number 1 on this engine. I'm going to go ahead and set it off to the side. Like I said, I will measure this in a later video, but not right now. I'm pretty sure it's going to be good. These rods are reconditioned. We've got, I don't remember what brand, King rod bearings, which I think are fairly good rod bearings. And just everything here should be happy. So we'll set this off to the side for now. That's going to do it for this video. I've done a lot of the measuring you have to do before you start assembling the block. The next step is going to be cleaning it. Once I clean it, I want to start reassembling it and getting some oil flowing through it right away. So this is, and it's going to be a couple days before I can work on this again. So this is a good stopping point. Nothing should rust. We shouldn't have any issues. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Up next is going to be cleaning a little more aggressively than what you might expect. And then after that, we will go into the actual assembly of the engine. So here's the reality if you haven't figured it out. This is going to take me a lot longer to put together than somebody just slapping it together with parts. Is it going to get better? I don't know. Am I going to feel better about it knowing that the clearances are within specs that I feel comfortable with? Yes. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And realistically, when I start putting these videos up, it'll probably go one week after the other on where they are. So unless you start commenting and really want me to put them up closer together. But I will likely have all these videos filmed by the time they start appearing on YouTube. So yeah, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you later.